Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Siju. Coming up in this edition, Pakistan says it will adopt a series of countermeasures against India's move following the killing of 26 tourists in Indian-controlled Kashmir. The International Monetary Fund projects that growth in the Asia-Pacific will slow to 3.9% this year amid escalating trade tensions. And the 3 Chinese astronauts aboard the Shenzhou 20 manned spaceship have entered the country's space station. We begin in Asia. Tensions between India and Pakistan are heating up following the killing of 26 tourists in Indian-controlled Kashmir. There have been reports of sporadic fighting between the two sides in the region early Friday. Pakistan says it will adopt a series of countermeasures against India's move following the incident. The Pakistani Prime Minister's office called India's measures to close border crossings and expel defense advisors irresponsible and unfounded. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif chaired a National Security Committee meeting that condemned all kinds of terrorism. The committee said India's attempts to link the attack with Pakistan without evidence are irrational. It decided to close borders, suspend trade, and declare Indian military advisors persona non grata. Daniel Khan reports from Islamabad.
Meeting in the wake of India's actions following the Pahalgam attack in Jammu and Kashmir, the National Security Committee has condemned New Delhi's steps as politically motivated and lacking legal basis. Key decisions announced by Pakistan include closure of the Wagah border and suspension of all trade with India. Pakistan airspace will be closed to all Indian-owned or operated flights. The committee has announced a reduction of Indian High Commission staff in Islamabad to 30, expulsion of Indian defense, naval and air advisors from Pakistan, and suspension of all SARC visa exemption scheme visas for Indian nationals. The NSC has reiterated that Pakistan rejects terrorism in all forms but warned India against using such incidents for political gain or to justify regional destabilization. It also highlighted India's alleged past involvement in extraterritorial assassinations and terrorism inside Pakistan. The meeting concluded by stating that while Pakistan remains committed to peace, it will firmly defend its sovereignty and respond with full force if provoked.
That was Daniel Khan on the diplomatic row between Pakistan and India. Turning to Europe, overnight attacks on Kyiv have killed at least 12 people and injured dozens of others. The Ukrainian Air Force says Russia launched over 100 drones and dozens of missiles during the attacks, which mainly targeted the capital. U.S. President Donald Trump says the attacks were not necessary and very bad timing as he pushes for peace between the two countries. Russia is accusing the Ukrainian side for obstructing peace talks by refusing to compromise. Dasha Chinisheva has more from Moscow.
We have heard the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova accusing Ukrainian presidents of actually inability to make any concessions when it comes to the negotiated settlement for the Ukraine conflict, and suggesting that this position is actually torpedoing any peace initiatives. She also has said that it is becoming evident that Ukraine's Zelensky is unable to strike a deal, and that was also the case during the implementation of the Minsk agreements. So Moscow is drawing the parallels here as well. Meanwhile, Moscow says that it is continuing its negotiations with the American colleagues, and Moscow says it does welcome the approach of the new American administration. They cherish the input of the Americans into this whole situation. But also we understand that Moscow is seeing certain differences in the position of the Western countries when it comes to the Ukrainian settlements. The West is not united in how to approach the negotiations on Ukraine. Moscow also welcomed the statements of the U.S. president on Crimea, suggesting that they are in line with the Russian general position. Again, Moscow has earlier welcomed the statements from Washington that Ukraine should not become a part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That was also part of meeting Russia's concerns to the settlement. So Moscow insists it is going to continue the negotiations, but what matters for these talks from the Russian point of view is that the Russian national interest, Russia's concerns, are well addressed in any negotiated settlement. At the same time, militarily, we are hearing from the Russian side confirmation that there was indeed an overnight strike, the massive strike using high-precision weapons against the military targets of Ukraine. Moscow insists that it was targeting the military-industrial complex of Ukraine, namely the airfields as well as the aviation and aerospace industry that was responsible for the military supplies, and Moscow says all of those targets have been achieved. The Kremlin saying that this is part of Russia achieving the goals of what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine.
That was Dasha Chinasheva in Moscow. In North America, the International Monetary Fund projects that growth in the Asia-Pacific will slow to 3.9% this year amid escalating trade tensions. This region supplies much of the world's daily necessities. It is discussing one solution at the IMF World Bank spring meetings to offset the U.S. tariffs' impact, trade more with each other instead of the United States. Owen Fairclough reports from Washington.
The International Monetary Fund and World Bank annual spring meetings are taking place at a moment when U.S. President Donald Trump has upended the entire system of global trade with tariffs or the threat of them. Even U.S. allies are now wondering if Washington is still a reliable partner, having created so much economic turmoil. And countries whose trade has been focused on the U.S. are now recalibrating their trading relationships to try to do more business with each other. And that's nowhere less true than for the Asia-Pacific region, home to many of the world's manufacturing powerhouses. Trump's tariffs hit growth forecasts for U.S. heavy exporters like Cambodia and Thailand hard, both suffering the steepest growth forecast downgrades in the region. But countries within this region are developing stronger trade ties with each other, helping consumers cross borders with a ubiquitous bit of tech.
Now you could have, within the ASEAN, you could have people selling things online, and they have a common QR code, and they get payment instantly. So these are kind of examples which can really boost intra-regional trade.
The IMF is urging export-driven countries to balance their economies with more domestic consumption, something China had embarked upon long before Trump's tariffs, as well as structural reforms.
If you look at several steps, more can be done. One is strengthening the pension system and the various pension systems. We also think there's scope to expand the healthcare system.
Even so, experts here are concerned that Asia-Pacific countries are the most exposed by tariffs because their economies are so export-driven.
Asian countries have continued to increase their participation in the global supply chain in recent years with rising exposure to U.S. demand. The share of value-added exports to the U.S. has increased both directly and indirectly through global supply chains.
If the picture looks challenging, large enterprises in these economies, especially China, India and Singapore, are integrating artificial intelligence at a much higher rate than their Western counterparts, as they look to future trade patterns that may seem very different to today's.
That is Owen Fairclough on Asia-Pacific countries exploring new trade patterns. In South America, as the world's largest coffee exporter, Brazil plays a vital role in the global coffee market. Reports say global coffee prices reached a record high of over $3.40 per pound in December, surpassing the previous record set in 1977. Though international coffee prices are soaring, Brazil has not only delivered strong export performance, but has also seen a shift in its trading model from long-term futures contracts to more short-term deals with global buyers. Lei Xiangping reports.
Business is booming at Expo Café, a major coffee cooperative in the Cerrado region of Minas Gerais, one of Brazil's leading coffee-producing areas. The cooperative supports more than 600 local growers and exports specialty coffee to over 30 countries, despite recent setbacks in production caused by adverse weather. Expo Café's exports are thriving. In 2024, the cooperative exported 515,000 bags of coffee, generating 840 million reals, or about $144 million, up 41% from the previous year. Cooperative Director Simon Pedro de Lima says the surge in prices have strengthened their push for international expansion.
Agora, a cooperativa ela acompanha muito de perto. We closely monitor market trends and guide our members to reach their full potential by targeting more profitable markets. To offset losses from lower yields, we've opened 2 new coffee transit hubs, one in the UK and the other in the US. The US hub has been operating for a year and helped increase local sales by 15% through partnerships with small and medium-sized clients.
Expo Case's success is part of a broader national trend. Across Brazil, higher global coffee prices have led to a significant jump in export value. In the first 2 months of this year, Brazil exported over 7.3 million bags of coffee, down 5.4% from the same period last year. However, the total export value reached over $2.5 billion, rising more than 58%. According to Marcio Ferreira, president of Brazil's Coffee Exporters Council, Brazil exported an average of 43 to 44 million bags per year over the past 5 years, accounting for about 37% of the global market. But last year, exporters made the most of the favorable market conditions. Analysts say the sharp rise in prices is also reshaping how global buyers work with Brazilian exporters. Previously, when prices were stable, exporters and buyers often signed medium to long-term contracts, locking future prices. The recent price surge has given Brazil's coffee exporters a rare opportunity to boost profits. But whether the country can sustain this momentum and consistently meet global demand will depend on time, weather, and the resilience of Brazil's coffee sector.
That was Lei Xiangping reporting. On China's latest manned space mission, the 3 Chinese astronauts aboard the Shenzhou 20 spaceship have entered the country's space station, starting a new round of in-orbit crew handover. Shenzhou 19 crew members greeted the newly arrived astronauts after the spacecraft docked with the Tiangong space station. They will work together for 5 days before the Shenzhou 19 crew returns to Earth next week. Zheng Yibing has more.
A Long March 2F rocket carrying the Shenzhou 20 manned spacecraft lifted off at 5:17 p.m. on Thursday from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwestern China. It is carrying Mission Commander Chen Dong and crew members Chen Zhongrui and Wang Jie to the China Space Station, which is currently manned by their Shenzhou 19 peers. The Shenzhou 20 spacecraft entered its preset orbital position smoothly. Staff at the launch site and people watching China's 15th manned spaceflight launch expressed joy and excitement.
The successful launch is the common expectation and pride of our team. I'm also very excited. It's the best outcome for our mission. From the production and assembly testing to the launch preparations, it's also the best result for our team's hard efforts.
Crew will take over the expensive orbital outpost from the Shenzhou 19 crew and begin their space journey, which will last around 6 months. Their morale was high and could be seen at the ceremony before they set off for space. The launch coincides with the 55th anniversary of the launch of China's first man-made satellite and China's 10th Space Day. Its success will pave way for the country's future space exploration endeavors.
That was Zheng Yibing reporting. Finally, in Africa, a growing number of cases of tropical disease Kala-Azar has gripped northern Kenya, overwhelming health facilities. Turkana in the northwest is one of the worst hit, with wards of the Lodwar County Referral Hospital filled with patients battling the disease. Dozens of people have died from the disease in Turkana and Wajir. Kenya has recorded hundreds of infections so far. Enoch Sikalia visited some patients undergoing treatment.
John Ekaru is just 9 years old, and for the past 3 weeks, he has been fighting for his life at the Lodwar Referral Hospital, some 674 kilometers from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. His body is weak, his spleen swollen, and he struggles to open his eyes.
We first thought it was malaria and were treated for malaria at a health center, but there were no changes. Days later, his body became hot and could not even sleep at night. He wasn't eating at all and was forced to bring him here.
Doctors say he has Kala-Azar, a deadly disease that most people outside this region may never even heard of. Here in parts of northern Kenya, from Turkana to Wajir, 1,123 kilometers apart, the number of Kala-Azar cases is quietly rising, devastating families already burdened by drought, poverty and insecurity. Many parents, like John's father, Charles Ekiru, have walked for kilometers, others days, carrying their sick children in the scorching heat, hoping to find treatment. The facility's wards are full, with some children being forced to lie on thin mattresses in the hospital corridors, clinging to life. Worried parents sit beside them, praying and hoping that they get better. So far, 34 people have lost their lives since the beginning of January.
The doctor asked me to look for a blood donor. Now that's my current predicament, and he also asked me to go to a chemist and purchase drugs for my boy. I do not have the money.
What kills mostly is one, when you've got anemia, and then when you've got very low platelets, and then when you've got a comorbidity, that's another independent disease together occurring together with cerebral leishmaniasis.
Health experts say Kala-Azar is cruel. It targets the most vulnerable and hides in silence. But what is even crueler is that it's been ignored.
As malaria.
Kala-Azar or visceral leishmaniasis is a neglected tropical disease that can be fatal if untreated. If left untreated, it's fatal in over 95% of cases. The disease is transmitted by the bite of infected female phlebotomine sandflies found in anthills, which are very common in these regions. The Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, DNDI, says action must be taken now with better healthcare, early testing and sustained awareness. The International Health NGO has been providing medical assistance to facilities like Lodwar Referral Hospital. The Kenyan government has been responding to an outbreak that has left over 30 people dead in Wajir County, with hospitals overwhelmed with the rising number of infections since December last year.
We have come together with development partners who have been able to assist us with drugs and other commodities. The National Treasury equally has released some funding that is going to assist us to add the commodities that are going to these counties.
For parents whose children are hospitalized with Kala-Azar, the hope is they respond to treatment and get better soon.
That is Inoxi Collier reporting from Nairobi. Now, recapping the headlines before we go, Pakistan says it will adopt a series of countermeasures against India's move following the killing of 26 tourists in Indian-controlled Kashmir. The International Monetary Fund has projected that growth in the Asia-Pacific will slow to 3.9% this year amid escalating trade tensions. And the 3 Chinese astronauts aboard the Shenzhou 20 manned spaceship have entered the country's space station. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.